So on September 7th, 2021, a journalist for Yahoo Finance wrote why the Rolex watch shortage is a perfect storm. It was written by Praz Subramaniam, and he interviews people like Eric Wind of Wind Vintage, who's an authority on vintage watches. He interviews Paul Altieri of Bob's Watches. He also interviews Ariel Adams of a blog to watch, and they all give their opinions as to why. And normally Rolex doesn't respond to press. They don't respond. They don't feel like they have to. They're a very private and secretive sort of company. They do, and they're very careful as well. But this article by Praz Subramanian, they did respond, and the response, in my opinion, it didn't really address as to why there's a Rolex shortage. It just explained more or less what they do and how they stand by it. I just want to preface by saying that I've been selling Rolex for close to 30 years. My love for them will never change. However, I do like to give my opinion. If I see something that doesn't sit right with me, I like to at least raise the question as to what's going on and why it's happening. Okay, so now I want to go over Rolex's response to the Yahoo Finance article. The scarcity of our products is not a strategy on our part. Our current production cannot meet the existing demand in an exhaustive way, at least not without reducing the quality of our watches, something we refuse to do as the quality of our products must never be compromised. This level of excellence requires time, and as we have always done, we will continue to take the necessary time to ensure that all our watches not only comply with our standards of excellence, but also meet the expectations of our customers in terms of quality, reliability, and robustness. Rolex does not compromise on what it takes to produce exceptional watches. Nobody's disputing the fact that it takes time to make watches. No one's disputing the fact that there is a quality control that Rolex adheres to, not just for their standards, but for their consumer standards. It's something they've always done. This is nothing new, and to me, it's kind of a moot point. They go on to say, as all Rolex watches are developed and produced in-house at 4 sites in Switzerland, they are assembled by hand with extreme care to meet the brand's unique and high-quality standards of quality, performance, and aesthetics. Understandably, this naturally restricts our production capacities, which we continue to increase as much as possible and always according to our quality criteria. They have high standards of quality control, they have high standards of finishing, they have high standards of excellence. There's no one that's arguing that fact. Now, definitely certain things have pushed Rolex back in terms of being able to deliver product. 5 years ago, they basically scaled back on production. No one knows the official numbers, but the word on the street was they were making close to 1 million watches a year, and they scaled back to about less 40% to clean up distribution, to control their product. I love Rolex, but honestly, come on. They finished by saying, finally, it should be noted that Rolex watches are available exclusively from official dealers who independently manage the allocation of watches to customers. Of course, the retailer manages their allocation and who their watches go to. A lot of retailers, I'm not going to name names, but a lot of retailers are saying to the consumer, hey, you want the hard-to-get stuff, you want a Daytona, you want a GMT, you want an Explorer, you want an Explorer 1, you want a Submariner, you want a Sky Dweller. Well, there are these watches in our case that you should buy. And you know what? You may have a good chance of getting the Daytona if you really want that, or the Submariner, or whatever you want. But there are no guarantees. We'll put you on a list, but there's no guarantees you'll actually get it. To me, that's bullshit. Now, this isn't a directive coming from Rolex, so I want to be very clear on that. This is up to the retailer at their discretion. But some of the tactics I've seen from certain retailers is just absolutely unacceptable, unprofessional, and greedy. The thing I like about Rolex's statement is, unlike many other brands out there, not just watch brands, but many brands in many facets of life who have blamed the pandemic as a result of why their supply chain issues, Rolex hasn't done that. Um, of course, their factories being closed last year for 4 months definitely hampered things, definitely delayed product getting to the end consumer. I want to make it very clear also that before the pandemic, Rolex was already having supply chain issues. Rolex was already restricting the amount of product that went to their retailers. Rolex works on an allocation basis to their retailers. It's not an official thing from Rolex. This is purely conjecture on my part. And from my experience, that before, Rolex would not accept the gray market, in the sense that there are two different markets. There's the retail market where you walk into a store and you buy a Rolex watch at retail. Then there's a secondary market where all these watches end up going to gray market dealers, dealers that buy up these products and resell these products. They're not official Rolex dealers. Now, Rolex definitely understands that the secondary market is the basis of what keeps the prices where they're at. Okay, so that's nothing new either. But in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the premiums that are going in the secondary market. So now, I don't know this for sure. Again, I'm purely speculating, and I'm just giving you my opinion. In my mind, what I think is really happening is that if the retailer is, let's say, selling a watch for $10,000 in the showcase, okay, their cost is anywhere between 35 to 40% off of retail. Now, for the retailer, they're saying the demand is so hot, if I sell it in my showcase, I'm only going to get 35%, right? I've got to pay employees, I've got to keep the lights on, I've got to pay dental, I've got to pay medical, I've got to pay all these operating costs. So what do I actually make if I sell it at retail? I probably make, by the time everything is said and done, I probably make 15 to 20%, maybe less than that, maybe a little more. I don't know the exact numbers. If I backdoor it, let's say, to a gray market dealer, and the public would never know this. Let's say I have a guy that's like, okay, I want to take 100 of your watches. Then what happens is the retailer can say, well, you know what? The market is so hot. That same watch that's 10 grand, give me 13 or 14 grand. Now the retailer's margin has gone up. The watches are being sold. Those gray market dealers in turn are selling it to another gray market dealer. They're selling it for a profit. That other gray market dealer is then selling it to the end consumer for more money. That's why we're seeing premiums go up. Now, I don't believe for a second that there's that much of a shortage where you walk into a store that has 500 to 1,000 Rolexes normally and you only see 5 watches in the case. If that was the case and retailers weren't really getting product, they would end their relationship with Rolex because there would be no reason for them to do business. Now with this heightened demand, believe me, there's no way a retailer is going to dedicate that kind of space to a brand that they can't get. It doesn't make financial sense to them. There's no way that a retailer would put up a store on the most highly trafficked areas in major cities, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on a lease that they're committed to for 10 years so that there's no product to be had. That doesn't make any sense to me, okay? I'm just using my head here. Yes, there is a demand for Rolex like there's never been before. There's millions of people who want these watches, but I don't believe that there's no watches available. There are watches available. They're just not being shown or displayed or sold in their stores. They're being sold, in my opinion, out the back door, which is something that retailers have done maybe on 1 or 2 models, but now that Rolex is so hot, it's almost on every model. That's why we're only seeing 5 to 10 watches in the showcase. They have to show they have something, if anything. So in my mind, there's no way to know exactly what's happening. And for those of you who don't know, Rolex is a nonprofit organization. They're in trust. The company cannot be bought, sold, or traded. They're not owned by a conglomerate. They're not owned by a group. I don't know many companies who make as many watches as they do, who have the value retention they do, and in this case, premiums like we've never seen before, up to 5 times their retail value. A $14,000 Daytona is going for between $40,000 and $50,000. It's a stainless steel watch. Now remember something. Precious metals have a value. They're a commodity. They trade for value. They fluctuate with the market. Okay, there's a perceived value that people pay for. Gold has a value. It's like $1,800 an ounce, right? That should have more of a value than stainless steel. But if anything, stainless steel has the value for Rolex, and they were the first brand to do it, and every other brand has followed suit. So the stainless steel watches are the ones that have become the showstoppers, the statement pieces, the status symbols for Rolex, and it's nothing new for Rolex. In response to why there's a shortage, honestly, their quote, it was kind of like they don't want to answer the question. They don't want to answer really why. They want to tell you and focus on, yes, we are quality. Yes, we have standards. Yes, we will not compromise on those things. It takes time to make our watches. I ain't buying it. Up to 5 years ago, you could walk into a store and the showcases were flooded with Rolex watches. They were Datejust, they were no dates, they were Air Kings, you could get gold watches, you could get steel and gold watches. Now nothing. In fact, everything, including ladies' watches, 31 millimeter watches, watches that you in a million years would never think are commanding premiums, watches with tacky colored stone bezels, watches that are ugly as sin, are impossible to get. Listen, Rolex controls the supply, and I get it. They don't want their watches to be devalued. They could push a button tomorrow and make 10 million watches. They're not going to do that. That would devalue their brand immediately. They could do that and have enough demand for 10 lifetimes. But what they're wanting is intrinsic value that is maintained, and the levels that they're at are way beyond what we could ever imagine. It used to just be the Daytona, or not even the Submariner, the Daytona. And maybe once in a while, a model like an Explorer or something like that had a surge, but never like what's going on right now. There's no watch off limits. Every watch is commanding a premium. These watches are no longer attainable for the general population. You can't go in and just buy it. So you have to rely on people like myself who have access to these things at premiums. Today, there are options. Today, the consumers have options. Rolex is not the only brand. They may be the only brand that their value is far beyond any other brand. But if you piss someone off enough who's like, I ain't buying into this bullshit, I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to buy watches I don't need just to be considered, and there's no guarantee that I'll even get. Unfortunately, this is going to be a reality for Rolex for many, many, many years to come if things continue the way they are, unless something really catastrophic happens. And even in that case, I think Rolex is pretty much bulletproof. I mean, I can understand if you're a brand like Romain Gauthier, a brand like De Bethune, a brand like Greubel Forsey, or Gronenfeld. There's so many independent FP Journe where you're making 1,000 watches or less a year for the world, where you have these shortages where no one can get product. But when you're making more watches than any other brand, and you're known for making a lot of watches, you're known for mass producing watches, and these watches are not hand finished. They're not of the level of the watches I just spoke of. Yes, they're very good quality. Yes, they have high levels and standards and everything else, and their engineering is some of the best. They've definitely stepped up their game. But come on, you're talking about a brand that at one point made close to 1 million watches a year. Even if that scaled back to 600,000 or 500,000, that's still a lot of watches for the world. So I don't know. You make the decision for yourself. These are my thoughts on, Rolex's quote, their response to the Yahoo Finance article. I think it's really interesting what's going on. Nobody's been able to achieve what Rolex is. That is the mystery, that is the genius of Rolex. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at amitdevhanda@gmail.com, or you can visit my website at www.amitdevhanda.com. Rock on, fly back, and stay healthy.